Yes.
Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that at 6:30 today, so just after we finish up here, there's an energy group happy hour at Hopfields. It's a bunch of energy groups on campus that are getting together to celebrate a good year of University of Texas Energy. So I encourage you, if you're 21 or older, to join. So I hope to see you there.
Where is that location again?
Hopfields is 32nd and Guadalupe. It's Hopfield. Huh? The beer is not French. The food might be. So yeah, come join.
Right, good afternoon. Let's get started with the talk. We don't have, this is the last talk of the semester, we don't have a talk next week, but students who are formally registered for this course, please do come also for next week for interacting with me. So only the students who are registered for this course. And I'll send out an email reminding you to come join us next week. It's a great pleasure to introduce our special speaker who is traveling all the way from California here to join us this afternoon, Nihar Patel. Nihar is the former Vice President of North America Business Strategy for Toyota Motor North America. In that position, he was responsible for developing American business strategy, ensuring future growth opportunities, engaging future technologies for Toyota's technology brand leadership, developing export markets, and also leading key strategic partnerships for Toyota. Before joining Toyota, Nihar had several years of experience in Europe and Asia, working in many senior positions for Ford Motor and Mazda Corporation. And even before that, or sometime in between that, Nihar was actually the managing director of Abdul Latif Jamil, the sole distributor of Toyota vehicles in Saudi Arabia. So you can imagine he has had a very long and vast experience in this industry, and so we are very delighted that Nihar is here. He received his bachelor's degree in marketing from New York University and a master's degree in marketing from Bentley University. Please join me in welcoming Nihar.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Good. So it looks like I've got 2 strikes against me. I'm the last speaker for the last subject matter of this subject, but I'm also keeping you from happy hour. So I'll try to make sure that there's not, this doesn't go on beyond the time it's supposed to go on. So Varun, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about, the subject matter says the better battery, but we can keep the subject matter as broad as we want to. There are a few slides that I'll take you through, and hopefully that'll spark maybe some interesting Q&A from your side. I'm told that normally you do about 45 minutes presentation, 15 minutes of Q&A, but maybe I'll change the subject matter. Maybe I'll only do about half an hour of presentation. So I'm really interested in hearing what's on your mind and maybe answering some more questions around whether it's mobility, whether it's energy, whether it's business structures, things like that. So here it is. Walk you through a few slides. So maybe just cover at a high level what are some of the global challenges that in the business world we've been dealing with. This is not a laundry list of activities that sort of keep us awake at night, but just some of the key ones that I'm sure you're aware of. How does that then translate to a broader subject called smart mobility, within which there is energy as an element of that, and I'll cover that very, very briefly. Then make a case in front of you for hydrogen fuel cells. Although it's not the end all magic pill. It's part of the whole game plan. So hopefully we'll get to have some dialogue about that. And then more importantly, what I'm interested in, which is some of your questions. So again, as it says, what are some of the challenges that we've been dealing with fundamentally as we plan our business? And part of my job is to look at not just the next 5 years, but all the way up to the next 30 years when it comes to certain elements, whether it's mobility or business around energy. The climate change issues that are going on, again, that's no surprising element to this group over here. Emerging markets, they continue to grow. They all go through these ebbs and flows, but that's where the population growth's occurring. That's where the desire to have more motorization occurs. That's where different business models strike up because motorization leads to both positivity and negativity in the arena. So we watch that pretty closely because congestion and managing congestion is certainly one element, and if you don't manage it, certainly all the downside risks of safety related, whether it's death that occurs if you're not careful or CO2 that occurs, if you're not very careful. And again, I think talking about business models, and love to hear your views on it, is the whole element of sharing economy that's taking place. That's just not a Western phenomenon. It's happening everywhere. You might read about smart cities taking off in countries that you wouldn't expect smart cities to be taking off in, and a lot of people are engaging that particular arena today. That drives a whole different level of how do you handle consumer demand. It isn't the very traditional automotive arena anymore where you have to go to a dealer and have to go do things through a dealer. There are many different ways in which you can experience a product. And then last but not least, again, there are probably many more that you might have on your mind. New laws, new regulations, things like the Kyoto Agreement, California's Air Resources Board's fairly top-down view on how do you manage CO2. I think those drive a lot of business strategy decisions that we look at. So how does it all translate into something called smart mobility? The one thing that's for sure is that not all the customers, and we're all customers, we'll say something, but we don't always behave in the same way. So I'm very passionate about green elements and technology, but I don't think that every purchase I make is necessarily always green first and then something that doesn't fill my needs and wants later. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And in the automotive arena, we see it because when petrol prices are way high, all of a sudden you see this amazing desire to go buy hybrids. Electric vehicles are starting, their flow, but not significant yet in the U.S. In Europe, they are through plug-ins, and in China through mandates. But now all of a sudden you see significant amount of capacity being added back by GM and Ford and Toyota to build more SUVs and pickup trucks here, particularly here in Texas. And that's all driven by the consumer demand that says, gee, it's nice that petrol prices have sunk to a low enough number, and we're willing to go back and buy what we really want rather than buying what we should be buying because petrol prices are high. Intelligent transport is taking off, whether it's tollways being put in and people are starting to drive towards get more people into a product. So if you want to go from point A to point B, sole drivers are not being engaged too often. You've got car sharing going on. You've got smart city projects going on. A lot of us are looking towards the future that's more automated in nature. So will we ever have robotic cars like you see in sci-fi movies? The answer might be a yo over there, yes and no. From an automotive standpoint, we really want people like me to have hands on wheels because we want to have some control in case something goes awry. But other than that, there'll be tons of technology out there that allows you to freely engage the road without having to always worry about safety as a mandatory element. But I think what's important is that whether you're a car maker or whoever you are, a dealer or some other person, you always have to make sure that you have value in what you're providing to the consumer, and that the consumer is only going to buy something but that he or she looks and says, this meets my needs and wants. And if it doesn't meet his or her needs and wants, then you're barking up a wrong tree potentially. So smart mobility, let me just spend a little bit of time over here, and I have another slide after this that'll maybe walk you through it in a little bit more detail. What we've been working on, and these are two elements of smart mobility, is multimodal transportation and then cleaner products. But let me address both in a little bit more detail. If you look at major cities that have different avenues of transportation, so whether it's bike lanes, the transit systems, and I don't know, I'm really not very aware of the Austin area over here more than I should be. But if you look at like in New York City, you've got the subway system, you've got normal roads, you've got bike lane capabilities, you've got electric bikes running around. And then if you fast forward to a city like Berlin, for example, where the Deutsche Bahn, which is their main rail system, you can actually connect everything from your house to your office through their app, and they tell you exactly how to get there. So if you want to go from point A to point B, you punch it in, and that'll tell you, hey, if you want to drive, you can drive from point A to point B, convert to a bus at point C, to a train at point D, and the whole thing takes about an hour, and it'll cost you $3 or €5 or whatever the numbers are. And you will have saved an X amount of CO2 by not driving from point A to point B. And then the Germans are very conscious about those sorts of numbers, as more and more people here in the U.S. are starting to become more conscious. But that's called multimodal, where any element of your share of transport is going to be provided by somebody. Now, whether it's an automotive company, whether it's a non-automotive company, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I think all car companies are trying to get into that. But rather than the old definition of, gee, how many vehicles can I sell him in his share of garage, it's going to translate over time to maybe share of your time spent mobilizing yourself from point A to point B. Now, in order to do that, ideally, of course, it's great if you do it with a cleaner product. So more and more you'll see people putting out either small battery-operated products all the way through to more hybrids, hydrogen, which we'll cover in a second over here, because I think as battery technology gets better, as it gets cheaper over time, whether it's Moore's Law or Elon's Law, whatever you want to call it, takes a huge bunch of cost out of the equation. I think it's automatic that more and more people want to do that, and it's almost going to be mandated that more and more batteries are going to be out there at the same time. So you'll see a lot of pilots, certainly within the U.S., but certainly all over the world, to use battery-powered vehicles to take you from point A to point B and connect to this multimodal approach. Let me just address the last point over there, because I think I've talked about the second one. This stuff's not going to be easy. Having done it now for the last 6 years, there is no magic pill. We have not cracked the code as an automotive manufacturer or whatever you want to call it to come back and say, hey, this is the way in which we can start something and instantly make some money. I think this is going to take some time. It's certainly, within the U.S., it's going to take a lot of time, because the ecosystem isn't there, the mindset isn't there yet, fully integrated with government, public, private institutions, to make sure that there's a project that we can all look at, say, if you do this, it kind of works, and you can use that as a template in city B, city C, city D, whatever it is. So I think it's going to be slow, certainly in the U.S., but I think there's a lot of people who are now looking at those kinds of things and saying, if we don't do it now, then I think we'll have missed the opportunity to get more electrified products on the road and get more cleaner products on the road. But again, it's not easy, and it's certainly not profitable yet as a journey. So here's just one example. This is Toyota's example. It's called SmartMobility Society, and it really focuses on 4 elements. One is comfort, then safety, ecology, and convenience. And I think if you look at this chart over here, you kind of have to, and I can provide this, Varun, if you want me to share it with the rest of the folks over here, because it's publicly available. But I think it's the combination of where these intersections occur: comfort and safety, comfort and ecology, ecology and convenience. It's really the ecology and convenience area that most people are going to be focusing on. So that's where you have more electric products out there, more hybrid products out there. That's where you have more smart city projects. That's where you have car sharing and peer-to-peer and this, that, and the other, whatever the right buzzwords are. All those buzzwords are playing in that particular area. And then we talked about autonomous very briefly at the beginning. That's where you've got the element of convenience and safety going on. So that's where automated products, lane keep assist, the car brakes for you, the car maneuvers itself for you, et cetera, et cetera. That occurs in that intersection over there. So a lot of this stuff is taking place now. So hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, the whole portfolio of products you see in the marketplace today will be far more advanced and far more clean than what's on the road today. And that includes petrol engines and diesel engines. So we're not just focused on just battery-powered vehicles, from an automotive standpoint. And let me give you an example of at least what multiple options there are when you look at electrified products. So again, this is an internal slide from Toyota, where you look at on the left axis, you see the size of the vehicle from small to large, and how far you want to go in terms of distance, small distance to long distance. And you say, what are the different ways in which you can use batteries to continue to put more batteries out so you get scale over time, but importantly, you take CO2 out. And you look at, when I mentioned some of the more unique looking battery-powered vehicles that will be coming out, These exist. They're being tested today around the world, whether it's in Japan, Europe, or certainly in California. They're being tested. They're small batteries. They'll probably go about 30 miles, 35 miles. They'll take about 8 hours to charge unless you put them in a high-speed charging mechanism. All the way out through to, if you can take all of your trucks and buses and large vehicles that transport other goods and people and convert them into some cleaner fuel, whether it's hydrogen fuel cells or pure batteries, then that's a great way in which the companies like Toyota or Ford or GM or whoever they are can add value back into the society. And in the middle, of course, is your medium distance. I think some of you showed me pictures of your electric vehicles and or hybrids, and that's a no-brainer. That's just going to be more and more of those vehicles out there. So very briefly on why hydrogen and fuel cells. You know, I think it's almost talking down to this audience over here. You know more about it probably than I do, because you're probably more of an engineer than I am. But hydrogen's available everywhere else in the world, and we're not going to lose it fundamentally. So why not harness its power? Why not take it, generate the electricity from it? Basically what we're saying is that this is not a Star Trek-y thing. This is not some lunatic idea. It's a better battery. It's basically taking fuel cells, and rather than saying the power is going to be generated from some plug or something else, it's just going to be generated from a different mechanism called hydrogen. Now, how you harness hydrogen, how you pump it into the system, are there infrastructure? There are many challenges out there, but this is part of that whole journey of saying, what are the different ways in which we can use batteries to provide more clean environment for us? So no reason, this is probably the worst slide that they'll be up there, and I apologize for what it is, but a lot of people talk about, well, gee, batteries are cleaner, or such and such thing is cleaner, or such and such thing is, you know, you're destroying the environment before you can do something. So we have to normalize the dialogue. So what we look at is something called well to wheels. The well being certainly the well, as you might imagine, the oil well, all the way through to the wheels in terms of how you generate power in the vehicle. And if you look at that journey from the well to the place where the vehicle is made, and then from the vehicle to how you drive it and how it generates power, when you look at that, fundamentally this is a emissions chart that says which items provide the most emissions, so the bar going that way is the most, and which items provide the least emissions in the marketplace. And if you look at it from the testing that's been done by UC Irvine, not UT Austin, UC Irvine, it shows that any combination of the fuel cell electric product fundamentally takes far less emissions, provides far less emissions than anything else. And even battery-powered vehicles, they certainly do a great job. But when you look at fuel cell vehicles that are, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can generate cleaner hydrogen out there through more access towards wind, solar, and methane capture and things like that, you start getting into areas where you start approaching almost zero levels of emissions, which is amazing, because I think that's the future that we've got to aim towards. And I think smart people like yourselves have to start thinking about how do you develop those business models by which you can force this thing to occur, rather than always depending on petrol and the petroleum coming out of places that either is generating more earthquakes in the ground, or allowing foreign powers to continue funding things we don't want them to fund. So here's the one magic that we've been looking at, certainly within the Toyota operations, which is, can we start finding more sustainable sources and making them more affordable in coming through? So right now, affordability is not there, but there are at least certain pilot programs going on, particularly around the landfill areas. And the LA area has, we're blessed, I guess, for no better choice of words, with at least 12 or 13 mega landfill slides. And as you can imagine, landfill slides have an immense amount of methane that is released from them. We have at least one pilot going in Orange County in a place called Fountain Valley. If somebody hasn't been there, you should probably check it out, where we are able to capture the methane, and it goes through its processing, and within it creates both CNG and hydrogen. And Hyundai Corporation is based right around the corner from there, and they pretty much fuel all of their vehicles through the completely clean methane-based hydrogen. And that's a great thing because we want scale. We want more projects like that that are funded by the U.S. government, the Department of Energy, and certainly some private equity from corporations. But there's a whole myriad of these things. I mean, ideally, we don't want to do much through corn because although it sounds interesting and nice, we're also depleting food things away from the system. And so the more we do with solar and wind and through methane capture, that's really what automotive companies are heading towards. And that's what even the Department of Energy is funding primarily. And of course, this stuff can be a business as well. If you start now, you can participate in the value chain of how hydrogen can start making money for most companies going out there. So, you can be a hydrogen provider to Walmarts of the world or some other companies, but all the way through to hydrogen's usage in airplanes because of their fuel cells that are used in Airbuses today. And I think even Boeing is thinking about doing some of that kind of stuff. So the hydrogen business actually can improve significantly. So although it seems like a bridge too far today, I think there's scale that's going to come through pretty rapidly from just the variety of usages that are out there. And again, I think I may have mentioned this earlier. This is not alien technology. Let me just explain this particular chart, at least from a Toyota standpoint. You have a hybrid vehicle on the left-hand side here, where you've got the batteries in the front, you've got your motor, you've got your fuel tank, you've got your generation, your power control unit, and you have your engine. And fundamentally, as you scale to different flavors of that hybridization, whether it's the electric vehicle, a plug-in, or a fuel cell, the architecture of the particular vehicle doesn't change significantly. You still have the batteries in the front, and you have the motor on the top side over there, and in place of the fuel cell, you take a hydrogen tank as opposed to a fuel tank in a normal plug-in or a electric vehicle. And in case of a fuel cell, you have a fuel cell stack as opposed to having an engine. So the great part about having an architecture-based strategy is that it doesn't cause a significant amount of waste, and you can actually maneuver to a lower cost program over time when scale is achieved. And here's sort of like an underbody view of that fuel cell that's going to be in the marketplace by October of this year in the U.S. and certainly is already available in the Japanese market. So you see the fundamental power control units, you have the motor, you've got the stack of the fuel cells. To give you an idea that over the last 20 years that a company like Toyota has been working on it, the fuel cell stack has gone from something that would have been twice this size, because having driven the Highlander, for those of you who might not know what that is, that's a fairly large SUV product, and having tested that for about 15,000 miles, that's a very large fuel cell stack underneath the vehicle. This stack is about the size where you could take a carry-on luggage, for example, and stick it up on top of the airplane. That's about the size of that fuel cell stack, and it's supported by 2 carbon fiber hydrogen tanks. In the Highlander, there are 4 carbon fiber hydrogen tanks. So over the years, the company has learned to be able to take number of tanks out, make them more efficient, the carbon fiber. They are very safe, and the proof is in the pudding that I wouldn't drive 15,000 miles testing a hydrogen-powered vehicle if I didn't think it was safe. But not so as not to take my word for it. The hydrogen tanks have been crashed, of course, to meet the NHTSA standards. They've been shot at by 50 caliber bullets. They've been hit by electricity at Boeing's testing laboratories, just to make sure and say, gee, we want to make sure there's no crazy element by which these tanks could explode and cause harm to the occupant. And I think, as many of you probably who study the energy elements in there, you know that if something were to rupture, hydrogen escapes straight up into the air primarily, as opposed to gasoline, which pools. And I think pooling is actually more disruptive to a person's issues during an accident than hydrogen going straight up in the air. I think it's about 48 miles per hour or something like that. So it's very fast dissipation. Now, one of the challenges, I think, as I mentioned earlier, was, so where do you find this hydrogen stuff? There aren't any fueling stations, right? So as a company, we decided internally to have a Kickstarter fund. We developed some monies out there, agreed by the board of directors, and found a third party to go and bid for some fueling stations. The state of California is actually a little bit generous. They put in about $250 million roughly over the next 10 years towards hydrogen infrastructure. They pulled ahead some funding last year and put up about $50 million. We put in about $20 million from our side, and the third-party integrator that we supported got 19 out of the first 28 stations that are going on right now. And I think by the end of this year, you'll have about somewhere about 40 stations available in the state of California, from north all the way from Sacramento down to San Diego, ramping up to about 100 stations by the end of the decade. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot because, you're probably sitting there saying, gee, I'm completely underwhelmed by those numbers. But I think when you look at a product like a fuel cell vehicle, which isn't constrained by, gee, I have to go plug it in now because my 30 miles are done or my 40 miles are done, you can drive 300 to 350 miles in one of these vehicles. So you don't have to have the congestion of 4 petrol stations at every street corner like we have today, which is an overabundance of fueling stations. What you need to have is a strategically planned map, which is what these circles represent, is that they've been done through a spatial modeling formula that we worked with UC Irvine to say where should we have the most ideal location. So although the numbers are small, they're starting to be in all the ideal locations. And there's always a criticism, gee, why always California? Why not the rest of the country? So we said, well, gee, why always California? Why not the rest of the country? So Air Liquide Corporation, which thankfully is based in the state of Texas in the great city of Houston, not as great as Austin, and they decided that this is their business. They want to invest for the long run, and they put up some monies, and we said, great, we will commit volumes to you, and you will commit infrastructure to us. And they're putting up 12 stations in the Northeast 95 corridor, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And that will go on in the first quarter of next year. So I think you start seeing a little bit of that mapping taking place, and at least by the end of 2016, you'll have a fairly good amount of stations in California. You'll have some stations in the East Coast. And then, as many of you are aware, the electric infrastructure is changing rapidly as well. A lot of companies are putting in fast charging, whether you're a company called ChargePoint or Tesla or other folks. They're putting in a lot of rapid charging areas, whether it's for a quick charge or whether it's something from a fairly large charging capability. So batteries will start getting a lot more friendly environmental assistance coming through, whether it's charging stations or fueling stations. And again, this doesn't happen by Toyota thinking, gee, we want to have hydrogen fuel cells become successful. It takes a village. Here's just an example of all it takes. It takes universities. It takes financing partners like First Element, Linde Corporation, the California Air Resources Board, economic commissions, and I'm sure you have your own representative companies like that over here in Texas. If Texas were to get onto that bandwagon, although I think right now it's CNG is the primary war chant from the state. So I'll just wrap it up because I'm really more interested in hearing what you have to say is that there'll be a lot of stuff that's occurring over the next 5 to 10 years, certainly within the U.S., but globally. Smart mobility solutions are already here. There'll be more of them coming through because everybody's going to be testing different business models. Why is that? Because battery costs are certainly declining, and they'll decline faster. You've got a gigafactory that's going up, several hundred miles from here in the state of Nevada, and that's going to do something positive for the cost side. That's going to do something positive for further usage of battery technology, whether it's in automotive products or whether it's in-home usage. People are also continuing to look for cheaper ways to harness things like methane, things like solar and wind. How can we get that cheaper and cheaper so we can use that to drive things that cause pollution, but drive things that cause pollution that people actually want? People want automotive products. I don't think that the element of, I don't think there's too many people out there today who say, hey, get rid of all automotive products. There might be a few in this audience today, but I think in general, I think people like the freedom that automotive products provide them, but if we can couple that with cleanliness, that's the element. But I think the element here that we've learned over the last 6 years of dealing with this is there is no magic pill. This is not one of these, gee, let's only support hybrids, or gee, let's only support batteries from Tesla or from whomever. This is going to be an and solution. So it's going to require clean petrol engines, downsized, turbocharged. It's going to require cleaner diesels, which is already happening more and more of. more hybridization is going to take place. More people are going to have to be given cokes to buy battery-powered vehicles, whether it's plug-ins and or full battery electric vehicles. And I think somebody's going to have to give a fair fighting chance to the fuel cell vehicle, because I think as infrastructure comes along, we already know that there are small pockets of people, at least in the state of California, who are waiting for them. So there's a long list of orders waiting already. Can we translate that into larger numbers over time? Patience is going to be required. Automated driving tools, as I mentioned, are coming. That's a great opportunity to get more clean, safe products onto the road. And I think some of you who are working on business modeling and business strategies and things like that, I heard somebody was just doing their master's thesis on that as well. I think a lot of different thinking is going to be required. The traditional approach that car companies only do this and governments only do that, I think it's completely shattered now. I think everybody's going to need to be part of the single ecosystem. Everybody needs to have a very singular view on what it's going to take to provide you and I with products we want, but you and I with products that are at least going to be cleaner and greener going forward, so that we're not being asked to shortchange our needs and wants on the if-come that these things improve the environment. So, a lot of change. I mean, rapid architecture changes, rapid infrastructure changes are going to take place. How the consumer behaves is really going to be the way in which technology stays longer, because if you don't show value, you're going to have to go back and revisit the value mapping. So I'll pause over here, probably gone to my 30 minutes over here, but I'm really looking forward to any questions that people may have, and any, looks like there's already one eager individual. Oh, thank you.
We start with student questions.
Yeah, I was hoping you might comment on the fuel different stations that you've got, and how much those cost relative to a normal unleaded gas station, and what you're thinking with price parities on that, if
Sure.
there's any projections and stuff.
So the first part of your question in terms of the stations, what was it?
Like, how much is it
specifically
costing to install those relative
Oh.
to a normal station? And I'm assuming that's more expensive right now. And so when is that going to come to be somewhat equivalent?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In fact, those stations are roughly about $1 million to $1.5 million a piece if you start at a greenfield site. So you've got to take into account the land costs and all that. What you will see more and more occurring is, for example, in the East Coast, Hess Corporation, who has these multitude of stations out there, people might just say, well, I only want this lane to be hydrogen stations. So you can run that to less than $500,000 or something like that at the same time. Over time, if you can create hydrogen right there, it becomes a lot easier. Now you need some access to solar, you need access to other elements to tap into as a fuel source coming through, but right now these are $1 million and $1.5 million. Now, in terms of what it takes to get to parity, until the present oil shocks that have gyrated the oil prices up and down, if you assume $3.50 or maybe $4 a gallon, I'm talking California numbers, so don't panic out here, roughly about $6 a kilogram, which is what hydrogen is sold in on a kilogram basis. Roughly $6 a kilogram is what the DOE says is what we need to achieve parity. We believe those numbers. We've done a lot of work with the DOE, and we think that if you can get between $6, maybe $7 a kilogram, then you're showing parity. But ideally, the customer is getting a no excuses vehicle, because you can still drive 350 miles on this like you can on a normal vehicle, and now you're adding back to society by not polluting as much, particularly if you get to greener sources. So, did I answer all of your questions? Okay.
Hi, over here.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. As a marketing guy, what are your strategies, or what challenges do you see in marketing products like I think it's called the Mirai, that's coming out in California soon? Marketing that, like why a consumer would choose to get a Mirai versus some sort of other electric vehicle, which is cheaper per se maybe, or gets as increasingly farther distances because the batteries are improving, like approaching 200 to 300 mile ranges. What strategies and challenges do you see in kind of competing with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think market development is the biggest challenge over here other than infrastructure. So I think when we started this process, we had at least 3 challenges. One was how do you get infrastructure out there quickly, because that takes a negative away from the consumer, especially if you start getting into the mass consumer base. Second is tease out the safety element. Make sure that people recognize that this is not an unsafe product. This is not an unsafe fuel. So a lot of work is going on there. And the third thing is provide the best value proposition for this product. So as I said, this is not one of these magic pills that you will only buy a hydrogen car, but you won't consider anything else at the same time. So initially, today at least, in the marketplace, if you want 300-mile range from a pure battery vehicle, you've got to pay $110,000, $115,000 in the market today at least. These vehicles over here will be marketed for roughly about $499 a month over a 3-year lease. Includes fuel, includes all the comfort and convenience features that you want, includes access to 24/7 monitoring at the same time, so that it takes sort of your worry beads away. And the market research that goes on behind this, because several years worth of market research takes place to talk to people who are identified as folks who initially are going to be out there buying these products or leasing these products and then creating the noise around it. They are people who are ready. They are people who've been watching hydrogen and the fuel cell dialogue now for 20 years. They've been waiting and telling us, what took you so long? Let's get it out there. We want these products out here. And then the product has to be engaging looking. So although I didn't show a picture of the Mirai out over here, it's one of these where you can show the product and you either love it or you hate it, because that styling is very in your face, for no better choice of words. And it couldn't be a vehicle that was just here's my product and I'm just going to put a badge on it that says it's a fuel cell vehicle, because although these people claim that they're understated people, because everybody always is understated, in focus groups, they really still want the vehicle to be able to show other people that, hey, I've got a hydrogen fuel cell product and I'm driving something really great from a technology standpoint that you're not driving. So there's still that element of the ego element in there. So as you work through your marketing strategies, you've got to work on making sure the infrastructure is in the right place. Choosing the right customers is very important, because you don't want to pick somebody who is going to run out of fuel, who is going to be far enough away from an infrastructure standpoint. And then importantly, your dealers have to make sure that they are extremely professional with these people, because these are sometimes lords of industry who are buying these kinds of products initially or leasing them. They expect a certain level of service, they expect a certain level of know-how and knowledge at the showroom level, and they expect to be nicely taken care of. So we're working on those to make sure that, let's say if you work at a dealership, you would be Mr. Fuel Cell. You would have to know everything about it so that the customer shouldn't have to teach you. You can be educating the customer, you can be developing the relationship. Before we think about broadening that pulse outside, if you don't take care of the first 3,000 people, the first 5,000 people, then you'll have lost the battle. So the whole element is, this is a long view. We're going to have to keep developing these customer relationships, customer engagement elements out there, but let's make sure infrastructure is there. Let's make sure the value doesn't dissipate. If we've got to give away fuel, which is what the companies are doing right now, to keep that infrastructure going, then go ahead and do it and do more things at the same time. So it's not one of these freemium strategies, but it's also not one of these where we think that it needs to be priced over $100,000 to get customers to buy a product.
Yes. Is there a standard fitting throughout the United States and for all models at the gas station to plug into the tank? And if so, how did the industry, with a lot of different manufacturers, come to agree on a standard fitting?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think some of you have seen that on the electric vehicle programs, there's global competition between different levels of infrastructure. Having watched that, the companies all got together with the state of California and said, let's come up with at least some directive, some standard, so that the fuel pump looks the same and behaves the same, and it connects in the same manner. The mechanism by which the weights and measures will be pulled together, so that if I fill up at your station and it says I filled up 5 kilograms, it's the same way as at his station, that's 5 kilograms. So, because weights and measures don't exist. So a lot of the work behind the scenes by Toyota, Hyundai, and some of the other companies has been to work with the state and the Department of Energy to say, let's create the standard so that when Air Liquide puts these stations together versus Linde or versus somebody else, it's all done in the same way. So I think that's a great question. As these stations come together, the proof will be in the pudding. Let's make sure, fingers crossed, that everybody has followed all the things. But there are SAE standards now set up, whether it's for the monitoring system, the weights and measures, and also for the fuel pump itself, that everything's got to be done the same way. And that's global, by the way. Did that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Hi. Somebody, whoever's got the mic. Fighting mic.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on the marketing aspects. I've been listening to a lot of things you've been saying, and you had that slide with comfort, ecology, convenience, safety, and you're talking about what people want, and you have to coax people to buy batteries, and talking about how consumers behave, and also the ego element. And I mean, I've had two hybrid vehicles, and I wasn't really happy with them. And it seems to me that on the whole, green vehicle side, you're completely fundamentally missing the aspect of what do people want and how people buy cars and the reason that people buy cars. And I would say that, the aspects of luxury, prestige, performance, and fun are really the main motivators. You've got maybe about 250 million vehicles on the road, and I think the total of all hybrids is like 3.5 million. So maybe 1.5%. Yeah. So if you're going to break this huge market, and also in the auto industry, it's always, all the innovations always come from the top-end vehicles, from racing, from generating real excitement that people like to have. So what kind of marketing efforts, and why aren't those kind of marketing efforts being made to really, generate demand in the sense of it's really what people want? It's not really technology-based, but it's what people want, and they really are desirous of having this vehicle.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think if you didn't have regulators and if you didn't have standards that are set from a safety standpoint or an ecology standpoint, and certainly economic standpoint at the same time, you could probably dream up of the best of everything put together. And I think you asked the right question, and that's why I said if you're not able to define value for these kinds of products, and the value doesn't have to be just price or payment or something like that. It could be design, it could be convenience strategy, it could be something else coming through, then I think we will miss the mark. And hybrids thankfully are growing, but it's taken a long time to get to 3 to 5% market share in the US market. That is a long journey because you can't automatically take people away from what they're used to, which is, hey, I want my SUV. Even though I'm never going to go off-road, I want that 4x4. I want all that space. And I don't really care what it costs to fill it up. We're trying to convert that mindset at the same time. So I realize that the mindset change takes a while, and we need to inject a little bit more fun. The fuel cell vehicle, if you were watching NASCAR over the last weekend, and surprisingly I'm a NASCAR fan, it was the pace car. Because the car can go 0 to 60 in a certain level of time, and we want to prove to people that you don't have to have a dull driving experience. You don't have to have you don't have to have a disengaged experience when you get into that particular product, because it is going to be very fun. It's going to be very exciting. It's going to be something that makes your heart pulse a little bit. Now, it's not a Ferrari necessarily, but if you notice what some of the luxury makers are doing, they're putting more hybrids out there. They're putting plug-ins out there. Not because they only want to, but also because they have to hit a certain CO2 standard in their markets and their brand as well. But it's great to see them doing that, because I think that also helps expand the marketplace to not just being mass market makers pushing technology-based products into you, but you can also get somebody saying, hey, I'm going to drive that Porsche XYZ vehicle, and it's got a hybrid on it. Now, the mathematics never work out. If you're going to buy it for the mathematics at that point in time, I would say, please challenge the mathematics some more. But I think it is for those people who say, hey, I'm driving a Porsche and it makes me feel good that it's a green hybrid version, then I think it maximizes the need for giving you an exciting product, a brand name that maybe creates some ego elements in there, but also makes you feel like there's some green. But there's no magic pill. We're going to have to continue mining these things. We're going to have to continue finding these people, giving them reasons to say, there's a reason why you need to buy this. There are some purely green people out there. They're just like, give me the car, give me a Prius. This is my 5th Prius. I'm going to buy another Prius because it gives me now 60 miles per gallon. But not everybody's like that. I realize that.
Tesla unique, and then is that a big factor in success? Is that they really work on these features, these performance features?
Oh, absolutely. I think Tesla. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, is Tesla unique in that they've done something very interesting in the marketplace that's very engaging to the consumer? Absolutely. They have really focused very smartly on a particular consumer segment. You know, whatever you want to call that particular segment. And they've said, hey, if you want that extra powered vehicle, if you want to make a statement, whatever the statement is, whether it's ego or green, and if you want 300 miles, and if you're ready to pay $110,000, have I got a short-run, low-volume program for you? That's doable, absolutely doable. And oh, by the way, we'll market it to you in a different way, we'll service it for you in a different way, we'll do on-air changes to the vehicle, this, that, and that stuff. That's very doable. The challenge is, how do you scale it to something that goes from 35,000 vehicles to 350,000 vehicles to 3.5 million vehicles? I think that's going to take a long time. That's going to take a long time. So we're going to have to come up with these 100,000 unit examples back and forth that are very targeted to certain targets. Buses, for example, aren't sexy, aren't very exciting, but we got to get more buses to be cleaner and greener, because that's going to take a lot of CO2 off the roads. We can catch up later, unless you're going for a drink.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Going back to the fuel cell cars, so I mean the Mirai project from Toyota, was that a huge project in terms of the total cost, development, launch, everything? I mean, can we get some ballpark numbers for how big a project it was? And even as a lifestyle luxury product in the next 10 years, what share or peak share do you think these fuel cell cars may achieve in the U.S.?
Yeah, great questions. I can't share numbers with you because it's not publicly released, so I apologize for not being able to do that, but it's definitely something that the company has spent a significant amount of time on, an effort, 20 years of engineering, so you can just do the mathematics that it's not a cheap project by any means. And it's gone through several generations of fuel cell examples and also several generations of how do you make the fuel cell to a particular product. So all of that takes time and effort. I think if you look at the publicly released numbers from companies like Toyota, you see that the maximum production cycle is going to be 3,000 units a year. So market share is a drop in the bucket, kind of going back to the original person's questions, that it's not going to be one where fuel cell is going to be the answer for everything. It's going to take some time because, again, these technologies are very expensive. Most companies, if you think about first generation Prius, for example, second, third, fourth, fifth, it takes time for companies to get the return on invested capital or return on whatever you want to call it. First generation, probably even the second generation, if I were to guess, didn't make any money for the company. But again, that was not the only driver to a particular program. Sales are one thing, getting new technology out there, building the roadmap to get to some levels of scale, that takes time. Now, Japanese companies tend to be a little bit more long-viewed than most of the other counterparts that are out there. So it's great that when companies like Toyota and maybe even some of our Korean friends like Hyundai take that long view, because they will keep investing. They'll keep that keep that positivity churning so that it can take costs out and get more vehicles out there. But I would say don't expect to see mega market share numbers. Now, maybe market share of fuel cells, it'll be fairly large, but fuel cells will be smaller than hybrids.
There's a question back here.
Great.
Oh, sure.
Thanks for your presentation. I had a quick question about, I guess, Toyota's thoughts on the future of private vehicle ownership based on that graph that you showed earlier that had, the size of the vehicle and the trip distance. It seems like there's distinctively different types of vehicles with different energy sources that are best suited for each of those types of trips. That in combination with the fact that younger people are getting driver's licenses on a declining rate, does it make any sense for people to be buying units of vehicles rather than units of travel time? And what is Toyota's sort of strategy looking forward for that?
Sure. No, I think that's a great question. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to project what the next 20 or 30 years are going to look like. We do continuous, whether you're Toyota or Ford or GM, you do continuous market research to gauge the pulse of what's happening out there. And at best, you're at least half right or half wrong, going forward. I think nothing, at least today, says that people are not going to want to own or lease or have some access to a automotive product that they call their own. and that there's nothing today that at least points to the fact that says everybody's only going to want to share the vehicle. So that may be good or bad. I have no idea what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years from now. Now, because we don't as a company, you've got to protect yourself in all these environments. So companies like Toyota are certainly very deep into protecting your dealer body. So you continue on giving them the right products and making sure dealers are successful in taking care of customers. But while that's occurring, you're also testing sharing models out there. So you're testing these kinds of units that are out to make sure that if he wants to drive just from the city center to his work or his school and back, he has access to it, whether it's on campus, off campus, things like that. So more and more companies are going to have to do that. So that's what I meant by the change is going to be so much more rapid that the product portfolio we're used to today, which is small car, medium car, large car, small SUV, et cetera, is going to change. And we'll start seeing some of those fancy vehicles that we've only seen in movies on science fiction channels and things like that. Because I think it's very difficult to say to a consumer, you can't have the product. The consumer is going to tell us how they want the particular product, and the company is going to need to respond to them fairly rapidly to say, if you want to own one, you can get it. It's still the greatest product around, and if you want to just share one, we want to be the people that provide you that opportunity. Hi.
So considering that across the country in different pockets, communities are starting to move towards net zero, and in particular, California set itself on the path of, by 2020, residential buildings will be net zero, and by 2030, all commercial. What role does Toyota see, vehicle transportation playing in the creation of net zero communities?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I may have mentioned just the word smart cities a couple of times in the presentation, that we see that in whatever that's occurring out there, companies like Toyota have to be part of that journey. So you have to be able to provide net zero vehicles, so battery vehicles, very unique ones, 2-seaters to 4-seaters that are out there. You have to promote smart charging in buildings that are going through, either putting it up yourself, as we've done on the hydrogen fueling stations, or making sure you partner up with the right folks, whether it's ChargePoint or Tesla or whoever it is, to engage them to have the right infrastructure available. You have to work with the local governments and make sure that the right incentives are provided to the consumer to create pull, because I think if you continue just pushing, that isn't going to move the needle. That isn't going to move things, because once the push ends, the volumes fall off or people's desires fall off. So you got to create the pull. So companies like Toyota are working not just from a product standpoint and also from an incentive standpoint, but also working with the local governments to make sure that there's enough reasons why you and I need to either live in a clean building, or you and I need to drive cleaner products, or you and I need to do certain things that take a lot of that bad stuff off the road. Whether it's all going to happen starting 2020 or not is still debatable, but the ball game's already on right now. Hi.
This might be more of a curiosity question. If for some reason you did run out of gas in your car.
If you did run out of gas?
If you did run out of gas, do you have to bring your car to a gas station, or do you have a high compressed gas cylinder to your car, or how would that actually work?
Are you talking about the hydrogen?
Yeah, hydrogen.
Oh, yeah, well, I think first of all, because of the monitoring mechanism, you shouldn't, because we should be able to monitor you and be able to tell you instantly that you're running out of fuel and that you should jump off, and I know you want to go have some fun, but go off and pump some gas instead. But let's say worst case scenario, if that occurs, there's a couple of things. One, the monitoring system would send a flatbed vehicle that would take that vehicle to a fueling station. Two, there's money in the system already for a delivery mechanism by which a truck could show up and pump it for you. Not every community allows that today, so again, that takes some time going through. There's a couple of, I wouldn't say fail-safe, but I guess if people don't pay attention to the fueling elements in there, you either have to jump off and fuel up, or you're going to have to wait for the pumping truck to come and take you away and or fill it up right there if it's allowable within the community. But each is community by community. We've tried to do this, but if I can go to his community and agree, his community might come up with a whole different rule and say, sorry, but I read this article in a different way, and you can't have a pumping unit coming through the system, let alone even to your home. Now, let's say you're sitting at your house in your garage and you realize, gee, I'm running out of fuel. Not too many homeowners associations allow a hydrogen vehicle to come through and fill up over there, because again, there's the view that hydrogen is highly flammable and it'll create a massive bomb or something of that nature. So I don't know if that answered your question, but please don't run out of fuel.
Howdy, sir. My name is Kevin Merrill. I'm a master's student at OBJ. Very interesting talk. I wonder why hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are trying to push to the private market at all, when it seems like the commercial market is your better client, especially with the hydrogen internal combustion engines being able to perform in ways that electric vehicles can't. So just talking about the struggles you're having with the infrastructure and everything like that, it seems like the commercial side of the house already has that figured out. It would be an easier fit. Yeah. So that's just an observation. I don't know. I guess you just want to try a whole market approach. But then after you stop giving away gas for free, how much would hydrogen cost in comparison to a gallon of gas? And I guess that's the big question as to why a commercial company would want to invest.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think one of those charts showed you that hydrogen is going to be an all fronts battle. You know, it's not just cars only, it's buses and airplanes and things like that. So you need partners who have the long view that said that if I'm in this business to create hydrogen and provide hydrogen, I'm going to try to find more sources that are out there. Now, just from a Toyota only standpoint, the view is not that it's only going to be for cars. There are buses being created and things like that, and buses use so much, you know, up in the top part of its system. You can absorb so much hydrogen that keeps your system running and churning in a very positive way. So you get some scale, for, at least from hydrogen usage. So I think there's a commercial element there. There's a non-commercial element at the same time. To come back to your other mathematics question, I think if you think about roughly, you need about 5 to 6 kilograms to fill up a vehicle that'll go about 350 miles. And it's about $10 a kilogram per the DOE's estimates going forward at scale. So you're talking about $50 to go about 350 miles. I think if you ask the average consumer today, they're paying about $50, $60 today, especially if you have a mid-sized vehicle to fill up your vehicle. So it's not something that's science fiction to think at some point in time in the near future, you can get to a situation where at $3.50 or $4 a gallon at California prices and at $10 a kilogram of hydrogen fueling prices, that you get to that sort of midpoint where the lines do connect. We're not there today, and therefore companies are going to have to fund some of that element by giving fuel to the consumer to get that positivity generated, but it could happen. You know, plus you do have the one wild card, which is if you can capture all these gases and come up with cleaner, cheaper ways to do it, then maybe there's even a way to get below, because you're not going to have to create all the same stuff because the gas exists. You're trying to capture it and take the bad stuff and make good stuff out of it. And if you're able to then create the hydrogen right at the fueling station, then you take out delivery costs and other mechanisms in the system. So maybe your supply chain changes over time. So again, I'm talking 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. You know, I might not even be around, but hopefully the journey is going to be a good one. Yes.
Hi. My question has to do with smart mobility. So I liked the way you presented that, and I know that Daimler-Benz and BMW, I think they have their own mobility platform. So BMW, I think it's called Drive Now, and then Daimler-Benz also recently bought out a local company here, Ride Scout, which is a multimodal platform. So it looks like those companies are really going into that sector, which I think is really the best. So I wanted to ask, what is Toyota's plan as far as maybe creating their own platform or becoming part of that ecosystem to really look at the bigger picture of how do we get more passenger cars off the road or get them to be shared and reduce congestion and emissions at the same time? Great question. I mean, I mentioned earlier that Berlin, Germany, for example, is the epicenter of great car sharing examples, or whether you're in or Germany overall. So BMW with their Drive Now, Car2Go with Mercedes, they've done a great job of connecting to all elements of the infrastructure and saying we're multimodal. You know, and you can get off your train or your bus, you can use my smart car or something like that. So taking a lesson from them, I would say that Toyota probably is a little bit behind in terms of creating that particular business. There are 2 tests running right now, one in Japan and one in Grenoble, France, which basically are saying, Grenoble, for example, is the headquarters of Air Liquide Corporation,
and also happens to be one of these very far-reaching, far-thinking cities in France that wants to take vehicles off the road, wants to not have congestion taking place, wants to just be able to provide product only when it's needed, so it's not offering parking in the city centers and things like that. So for that, there are very unique products that Toyota has developed. It's called an I-Road, which is it's a product that basically is able to carry 1 or 2 passengers. It's an active lean suspension vehicle that will drive on any infrastructure that's available to you. It's also got a 4-passenger version of it also at the same time. It's not the I-Road, it's called something different. It's called COMS. But there are very unique products that are developed to take part in smart city projects. So maybe the approach from Toyota is different than the approach from BMW and Mercedes that says their business is let's create a whole company whose only business is to do car sharing and things like that. That may be the right approach also. But Toyota's approach is let's connect with cities that want to change completely and provide them very unique transportation modules that are then connected to the multimodal mindset and see if that works or not. Now, if that doesn't work, I think like any good company, you shut off that project and you try something different. There are traditional car sharing projects still in California that are going on with, city car share in San Francisco, with a few other places. So we're still doing some of the traditional stuff within the Toyota operations, but there's some really non-traditional stuff going on at the same time to see, is that the better way in which you can provide a product, but not necessarily have to invest a whole bunch in creating a whole new company at the same time.
The I-Road, is that all electric?
I-Road is all electric, yeah. COMS and I-Road are all electric, and they'll do about 35 to 40 kilometers.
Coming to the United States?
They're being tested. We have safety standards to look through.
I have the final question for you, Nihar, but before I ask that, let me really thank you for your insightful talk and for this really engaging discussion. To my question, you have mentioned dealerships a couple of times. And dealerships.
Yes.
And they're obviously a very important and critical part of the entire supply chain of how things get delivered, bought, and serviced, and so on. What are the incentives and disincentives for dealers to engage in these types of new technologies? What have been some experiences all across, when we did the hybrids, now the electrics, and increasingly with fuel cells? What are some of the kind of touch pressure points with dealerships? Because this is anecdotal hearsay where certain dealerships have not been as proactive or may have been actually negative in how they present electric vehicle options. And so how is that piece of the puzzle thought through?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because no matter what I can wax on about, the consumer's engagement with the product only happens through the dealer primarily, so that's where you make or break it, fundamentally. So the example on the hydrogen fuel cell program, recognizing that you need to be very selective on dealers. You need to be very selective on the salespeople who are touching the customer. You need to be very selective on making sure that the dealer has the right service infrastructure for servicing a fuel cell product, which isn't going to require a lot, but when it does, you need to have separate areas for servicing it and be able to show the consumer how that servicing is occurring. So it's been a very limited rollout of dealers. 10 dealers have been chosen within the state of California, maybe 15 at the max. Same thing will happen on the East Coast, and these people will become people who are totally experts. Now, these dealers were not chosen by just saying, gee, who's the most high volume selling Prius dealer, and who is the person who makes up fancy customer satisfaction numbers or something like that. No, they were brought in through to the laboratories in Japan. They drove the early prototypes. They started smelling, touching, feeling, tasting this particular product, and you started seeing a ramp up of their excitement and enthusiasm for hydrogen and fuel cell as a technology. And then only when they were at the climactic point did we say, and oh, by the way, it's going to take a certain level of investment for you to get this product. Are you willing to do it? Then that merge of enthusiasm and investment came through, and these dealers have been chosen. Whether they will all always behave the same way as we want them to, I don't know, but keeping it very selective, keeping it to 10 or 15 dealers in Northern and Southern California allows the company to be much more control-oriented at the same time, so you can almost have a one-to-one, because like I said, initially the volume is not going to blow anybody's doors out, right? It's going to be 3,000 units per year globally at the same time. So even if the U.S. gets 2/3 of the volume, you're talking about 2,000 units in the U.S., you can almost manage that on a one-to-one basis. through the dealer. So the factory side and the dealer side have this tremendous symbiotic relationship. And let me just say one thing. We did a dealer meeting at 6:30 in the morning in Newport Beach, California. They were all flying out to Japan. 6:30 in the morning, all the dealers came, which was shocking in the first place. Second thing, after the presentation on the fuel cell vehicle, the amount of enthusiasm in that room was scary. That the people were like, why is it that I can't get this in Minnesota? Why can't I get this in Florida or Texas or something? Because initially the rollout is California and East Coast. So people start recognizing that these kinds of products are going to make an impact. There's an opportunity for companies like Toyota or Hyundai or whomever to take some leadership activity, keep building on your brand pillar called technology or societal elements of whatever it is. And this thing is one of those sort of, fly to the moon strategies that says we will get to the moon by the end of the decade. And I think this is that journey. So the dealers see, they're not dumb. They're investors. They're people who take care of people. And they see that this is the future we've got to protect. It's our job to make sure that everyone provides the same level of service to the consumer, which isn't always guaranteed. I realize that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.